Hello, and thank you for listening in today. We have with us Rayner, who is the Global Head of Communications Research at Kantar TNS. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you.
So Anne's here to tell us a little bit more about the very exciting research she's been working on, her and her team, that looks at gender in the workplace. So Anne, what can you tell us about this research?
We interviewed 630 media and marketing professionals across Asia Pacific, and we partnered with Campaign Asia and mainly drew that sample from their database. And what we wanted to do was to try to understand the workplace experience of men and women, and to see if we could find any reasons for the barriers to female representation at the top levels of leadership in our industry.
Wonderful. I understand that you found some surprising things that were not barriers to women.
Yeah, that's right. So when you look at the literature and you have discussions about gender equality, there are a number of things that are discussed. And what was really interesting was the number of things that are not actually really affecting female progression in the workplace. So it's not about taking time out of the workplace to have kids. And it's not about women not aspiring to leadership. We know that women have just as high aspirations to the top job as men. And also that it's not that male or masculine leadership traits are more valued than feminine traits. We actually found that the traits that are valued for leadership are neutral or potentially even quite feminine, things like collaboration. We also found that it wasn't about women not having access to mentors and career sponsors. Actually, they have the same access as their male colleagues do. So all of these things were myths that were busted that don't apply as the main reason for gender inequality in our industry.
So then tell us, what were some of the barriers that women do face?
It's really just one thing, and it's very simple but also incredibly difficult to change, and that's unconscious bias. And that manifests itself in lots of different ways in the workplace. So from women being interrupted more often in meetings to finding it more difficult to get respect and credibility from top management. And that leads to, so we had 68% of women saying that they saw men getting more opportunities than women in their workplace. And 43% of women have actually missed out on an opportunity because of their gender. So these are huge numbers. And anecdotally, a lot of women also talked to us and talked about that there is an old boys club at the top, and it's really difficult to change the status quo, and that's all down to unconscious bias.
Now, I know you mentioned this research looked at both the male and female perspective. What did the men have to say?
Well, it was really interesting actually. When you look at concrete things like what policies are in place and what actions the businesses are taking, men and women said exactly the same thing. But when you talk about the personal experience of work, which is where this unconscious bias manifests itself, the male experience was quite different. So they didn't feel the same level of difficulty to get respect from top management. They didn't see that they were missing out on opportunities. And in fact, some of them also recognised that men were given more opportunities than women. And I think the message to men is really that just because you don't see it with your own eyes, it doesn't mean that this is not happening. So because it's unconscious bias, it's invisible to most people. And so male leaders really need to be talking to the women in their organisation and listening to understand what their experience is so that they can try to change it.
Now, I know some of the findings were presented at quite a senior summit in Asia Pacific with the hopes of developing a charter. Can you tell us more about that?
So we presented the findings at the Campaign Asia Diversity Summit, the Campaign 360, this year in Hong Kong, and there was lots of really great speakers and discussion around the topic. What was really encouraging was the key outcome from the research, which was the heads of all the media groups in Asia Pacific signed a charter for change. And there were 4 key actions that they agreed to in that charter. The first one was that they would conduct a pay equality review. The second was that they would create an action plan for gender equality, because only a third of organisations currently have one in place. Then they also agreed that they would implement flexible working options. And that was a really interesting one, because conversations with a lot of the participants showed that there is still a lot of education that's needed about what flexible working really means beyond just part-time working. And so I think there is a lot of opportunity for businesses to do some research into what flexible options could work for their situation. And then the fourth one I really like, which is that each member of the executive committee is to identify a member of the opposite sex to mentor as a successor.
It's wonderful. Those are great outcomes. Now, what does that mean for the Australian businesses looking to take on some of these activities?
Yeah, good question, because it is a study that was done across Asia Pacific, so Australia and New Zealand was really only one small part of it. You know, we tend to think of ourselves here as the developed market in our region, and what we found actually was the reverse, that the experience for women in Australia and New Zealand is actually worse than some of our colleagues in Asia. And I think that's a real eye-opener for businesses here, which is that we're not making more progress than our colleagues in Asia. This is a real issue that we need to address here, and the masculine culture that we live in does come into the workplace as well and affect the experience of half of our talent.
Excellent. Well, listen, we really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.